fire risk assessment at our place. Once a year, I guess.
Of course we do it. It's required by law. It's down to the boss to get it organised.
We have fire wardens and all. Our managers know who they are.
Spotting the hazards is part of the assessment, isn't it? I'm not sure who does it. Somebody.
While you're playing past the responsibility, the hazards are going unnoticed, unchecked. You may not see a fire, but the potential is always there and very real, waiting to leap out at any opportunity.
I know it could happen, but not at our place. We don't do anything dangerous. I just can't help feeling that it probably won't happen.
Until it does. Until the source of ignition finds something that burns. The young vandals torch the pallets for fun. The portable heater finds the curtains. The hot work spark strays too far and ignites the solvent. These three form the fire triangle: fuel, heat and oxygen. Remove any one of them and there is no fire. But once the ignition source meets the combustible material, fire needs no encouragement, just air. And if it can find a pathway to other places, it can spread and grow rapidly.
Sure, fire's a hazard. Crossing the street's a hazard. But fire won't happen to us. It'll be okay.
Until it isn't.
See Radio Dockside Gloucester. This morning's headlines. Overnight, firefighters battled in vain to save a Gloucester factory from total destruction.
And when you look at the factory now,
there isn't one. There's nothing left. We were always aware that we were dealing with materials which are designed to burn. That's what a candle is. I had no idea that it could do this much damage in such a short time. But I knew always that we were dealing with a potential for danger, but the scale of it has just devastated. It's absolutely devastating.
What happened at Lanecraft could happen anywhere. You can't unstart a fire. The best thing to do is to stop it starting in the first place. And fire risk assessment has a significant role to play. Not as a one-off exercise, but every day, as part of everyone's daily routine. Here's the sequence for fire risk assessment. Identify fire hazards and people at risk. If you can, remove hazards completely, or relocate the people at risk to somewhere safer. Reduce other hazards where possible, by, for instance, using different equipment or materials, relocating activities, repairing faults or structural defects, by adopting safer practices to protect people and premises. There will still be some issues you can neither remove nor reduce, so you must manage the remaining hazards. You must record the findings, and a plan of how to deal with an emergency should be prepared. Review your assessment regularly. Let's make a start.
We are going to go forward, we're going to do it again, but I'm never going to see this again. We were very lucky to find these premises. Although they're temporary premises, we were able to get in and get up and running fairly quickly after the fire. We kept the clock here as a memento or reminder of just how bad things were, if we needed anything to remind us at all. One of the first things that we did after the fire was to look at our situation, and we appointed Lee Tickle as our fire safety officer and our health and safety officer.
Lee's job at Lanecraft depends on his scientific background, which equips him well to understand the requirements of fire safety. Even so, he, like anyone, will benefit from training. He's planning for fire safety once the company has moved from temporary premises into permanent accommodation.
Well, doing a fire risk assessment is a very big responsibility. You can get advice from the fire brigade, but it's often easier and sometimes better to get advice from somebody who's done them before anyway. I'm going to visit Colin, who's a fire safety officer at a very modern factory, and he should be able to give me good advice on what I need to do.
Would you like to wear the badge while you're in the building?
Early.
Hello.
I'm Colin. How are you?
Pleased to meet you.
You too.
So where do we start?
Well, you already have by signing in. We can't afford to be casual about this process because if there were an emergency, we need to know who was on the premises and why they were here. I don't know if you're strict about this at your place.
So how do you go about doing a fire risk assessment? I'm responsible for it in our place. Who's responsible for it here?
Well, I'm sure you know that it's the employer who is legally required to assess the risk of fire in the workplace. But in the case of URI, we're carrying out the assessment on their behalf. If there are 5 or more staff employed, a formal record of that assessment has to be kept. And the employees should take some of the responsibility because they're able to make a very important contribution to the company's fire risk assessment and ongoing fire safety. By being alert to fire hazards, fixing them, and certainly reporting all of them, fixed or not. So that's the first step. Identify the hazards and the people at risk. You could call this my Black Museum.
The room is set up for training purposes, and the idea is to identify some of the many hazards common to businesses.
Like this box, propping the door open.
Yes, well done. This is one of the most typical causes of fire in the workplace, an overloaded socket. Portable heaters. And this is a very common cause. And another. You couldn't get out through here in a hurry. Here's some combustible material, dangerously close to a source of ignition. And more of the same. Soft furnishings and fittings, all good fuel. And a damaged chair like this is certain to attract the attention of an arsonist. And, of course, flammable gases and liquids. Aerosols like this, cooking oils, paints and thinners, bottles of adhesives, petroleum products, these things feed a growing fire, so need to be stored out of harm's way. These are just a few examples of simple hazards, and we haven't even thought about production activities yet. When you come to do your assessment, make a list of everything that burns and of every source of ignition, so that you know what to keep as far apart as possible. And remember the structural features, things that might not be obvious, like the hollow space above a suspended ceiling that could allow a fire to spread. Of course, you need to take note of people at risk. When I checked the book this morning, I noticed that we have a subcontractor on site, so we made sure he is fully informed about site safety and evacuation procedures. And today, there's a visitor in a wheelchair. We also have an employee in a wheelchair. The point is, you need to be aware if anyone on the premises has impaired vision or hearing, or is disabled in any way, and provide for their escape in the event of a fire.
I think a lot of companies still don't realise they have a legal requirement to do a fire risk assessment. I think they find the whole process quite daunting.
Well, it's not really. It's just a question of common sense, applying simple logic. Make sure that you've considered every possibility in order to arrive at a full risk assessment. Anything you miss may well cause problems later. There's a checklist of questions in the FPA's book, Fire Risk Management in the Workplace. I find it very useful. You should get one. It might help to separate the whole site into distinct areas and assess each one separately.
That's exactly what I've done in our temporary premises.
Once the hazards are identified, see what risks can be removed. This may seem like a small thing, but remove any paper you don't need. Discarded packaging, even out-of-date notices. Don't let rubbish accumulate. When a socket is this overloaded, it's time to replace the adapter and fit a new wall socket. Replace damaged leads. Keep tea and coffee making facilities in a central dedicated area. If you need extra heating, remove portable heaters and replace them with fixed wall or floor heaters. Replace old or damaged furnishings, fittings or fixtures. Replace heat-generating filament bulbs with cooler fluorescent lamps. Any supplies you're not using immediately should be stored safely. And if they're flammable, they need to be in a secure, flame-proof cabinet. So, that's done a fair job of clearing up the Black Museum. Let's take a look at real life. Remember that smouldering match? Well, this is our only smoking area. Smoking is not permitted anywhere else on the site, including the car park. Let's head for the action. I reckon this counts as removing, even though we're putting something in place. This is a fire-resistant wall, and it separates the manufacturing process from the rest of the building. And where cabling and piping passes through the fire-resistant wall, the gaps around the edges of the hole need to be filled with fire-resistant stopping to prevent the fire passing through. Down there are some hazards we can't remove. We work with flammable materials like you do at the candle factory. And our machinery, well, it's a source of ignition, so we have to do what we can to reduce the hazards. Where you can't remove or replace a risk, you should try to reduce it.
At our place, we can't help heating wax and fragrance together, but we reduce the risk by never leaving the process unattended.
Yeah, wax and heat aren't a very good mixture. Essentially, you have to keep these sources of ignition under constant scrutiny and separated from combustible materials as far as possible. This is simple enough. Check that equipment that has been portable appliance tested has an up-to-date tag. Report it if it's out of date, and don't use the equipment. These materials are kept on pallets inside a footprinted area. By storing them this way, they are kept in designated safe locations and do not stray into pathways and risk blocking escape routes. Only the minimum of flammable liquids required at a workstation for a day's work are stored in this dedicated metal cabinet with a spill kit, so that if a flammable liquid spills, it can be wiped up immediately. Larger amounts are stored outside. All waste is stored outside in dedicated bins, and the wooden pallets are stored a safe distance from the secure perimeter fence, out of reach of arsonists and away from the building or any overhang of the roof. So, we remove risk where we can and reduce what remains. But you can never do away with risk entirely. We'll be left with some by the nature of the premises or the business. The next stage in fire risk assessment is to manage the hazards that remain once others have been removed or reduced. So, what measures need to be taken in order to protect the workforce against the rest of the risks? Well, it's just a question of good safety management. For instance, the workforce need to be told where the nearest or alternative escape routes are in the event of fire, and there need to be unobstructed routes to those exits.
Yeah, where I work, we've got a security shutter on one of the exits that I have to make sure is open during the working day.
Mm-hmm. Of course, escape routes need to be clearly marked, so fire signs are important. The fire alarm system needs to be fully operational. This beacon flashes if the alarm goes off, in case it can't be heard over the machinery, or to alert anyone with impaired hearing. Staff need to know what to do if the fire alarm sounds. Fire action notices give that information. All staff need to know about these measures and to alert management if they observe things like obstructed exits, non-working alarms, missing or damaged extinguishers or notices. It's a good idea to train staff in using extinguishers, even if company policy is immediate evacuation if the alarm sounds.
Release the hose. Holding the end of the hose, we're going to aim at the back inside edge of that tray. Bring it down slightly so we're hitting that back edge.
Each business will have its own plan of action, which will be determined by its premises and its circumstances. In the case of our business, we divide the whole site into separate areas, and a fire marshal is responsible for the evacuation of each. Each fire marshal will know if his area is clear.
This is a fire-resistant area. It's called a refuge, where anybody who can't use the stairs or get out unaided will be safe until they're evacuated by either the fire brigade or a member of staff. And these are lightweight evacuation chairs, and they're on every landing. Some businesses, offices, and warehouses or factories have sprinkler systems. In our warehouse area, we have in-rack sprinklers with cages to protect the heads from damage, and a gap between the sprinklers and the stored material so water can get all the way down through the racks when it's needed. We have to make sure the sprinkler system is regularly inspected and maintained. It's worth considering if your existing safety measures are adequate, and installing more emergency lights on escape routes and more extinguishers. You need to have an up-to-date list of fire marshals and, of course, signs everywhere. A vital part of any assessment is recording the results and having them available in case the fire brigade want to inspect them. And taking immediate steps to remedy any shortcomings.
But even after all this, you can still have a fire, and don't we know it?
Yes, of course, that's why planning is so important. Murphy's Law always operates. So, for whatever reason, usually bad housekeeping or human error, a fire will start, so you need to know how to react immediately. The emergency plan.
Well, before I came here, I thought it was all right for companies in modern premises with all the safety systems designed in. But there are things you do here that I see that any company could do, whether they're in new or old buildings, and they don't cost a lot of money.
It's just common sense. It's about attitude and a culture where everybody acknowledges their own share of responsibility.
After my review of fire safety and tour with Colin, he gave me one final piece of good advice, and that's never to stop reviewing the fire risk assessments. Well, we found an escape route that needed to be cleared. We've initiated some special procedures. This one's for the heat seeing machinery that we use. In the factory, we regard the clean-up process as part of the working day. So we stop production 30 minutes before the end of the working day to give everyone an opportunity to turn off all sources of heat, switch off the machinery and tidy up. Well, I'm looking forward to doing a fire risk assessment both before and after we move to our new site. Lessons we have learned and the procedures now in place at our temporary accommodation will stand us in good stead when we have a permanent site. And new fire exits over here.
Right.
You can't go back, so go forward.
Haven't we just done this?
Yes, but your premises may be refurbished. New equipment may come in. Staff may change. Identifying new hazards is a daily responsibility.
Is there a prize?
Several. You get a safer workplace, you've obeyed the law, and you get cost-effective budgeting for fire safety. So it's worth remembering that fire risk assessment is an ongoing process in a commitment to stop fires starting.
There are a number of FPA publications designed to help you carry out a fire risk assessment. Details of these and other publications, products and services may be found by visiting our website www.thefpa.co.uk. You may find this address too on the cassette cover. The 4 key actions to be taken in the event of fire are the same. Raise the alarm. Call the fire brigade.
Report a fire.
Attack the fire. And evacuate the building.
The next day, when the first person comes in and switches on the power, the now empty deep fat fryer starts to heat up. Soon that residue reaches smoke point,
Then flash point,
then fire point.
and finally auto ignition point.
Chips were off the menu that day.
And so is everything else.
I identify exactly what the hazards are and figure out what sort of damage they might do to me. Then I minimise the risk.
While the staff leave the building by the nearest available exit and make their way to the assembly point, the wardens make a quick but thorough check of their individual areas of responsibility. When they're sure everyone's out, the wardens go to their assembly points, taking the staff list for their area so they can carry out a roll call.
And if you're really unlucky, a further fraction of a second later, you'd probably be dead.
Think about those near misses. Just because the falling object misses you doesn't mean that everything's okay.
Sounds a dumb thing to say, but hot work always generates heat. More heat than is immediately obvious to the eye, as this infrared image shows. A lot of materials conduct heat, and that can include floors and walls you're working on.
So they're not in the way. But bear in mind, we don't want to have reflections causing glare. So angle lamps, or adjust window blinds, or position a screen to prevent it. You might...
How that weight is distributed. That's because loads can be very awkward to balance. So again, take nothing for granted.
Its purpose is to alert everyone to a serious threat to their health and livelihood, and to explain some simple measures you can take to protect yourselves and your colleagues against this threat. The threat of arson.
You can cut off the oxygen by smothering the fire with a fire blanket, foam or carbon dioxide. Or you can remove the heat from the fire by cooling it with water, slowing down the chemical reaction until it stops altogether.